Welcome to Father, Son, and Skillet. Follow along as we make one of our all-time favorites, spicy Italian sausage. It all starts with pork shoulder, also known as pork butt or Boston butt. We like that because it naturally has just the right amount of fat to lean. The first thing we do is get this pesky shoulder blade bone out of the way, and we still haven't learned the easiest way to do that, but we get it done somehow. Now that we have that bone out of the way, we'll take a big breaking knife and cut this chunk into slabs, about 1 inch thick. We're trying to keep everything in the size that will go through our grinder. Next, we'll take one of those slabs and cut it into strips about 1 inch wide. And the next thing we do is to cut those strips into cubes. We're keeping everything about 1 inch so that it goes easily through our grinder. Your grinder might need bigger chunks or might need smaller chunks. And did I mention we're cutting up 2 of these? It's a big batch of sausage. So once that's all cut up, we have 2 pork shoulder blades we'll save for the stock pot and a tub full of meat to grind for our sausage. Before we grind it, it has to be cold. We want it under 34 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 1 degree if you're thinking Celsius. A couple of hours later, and our meat is cold and ready to grind. Our grinder parts are cold too. Let's assemble the grinder next. You can see how cold it is by the frost on it. First the housing, then the meat tray goes, then the auger goes in, and then we put the knife in place. We're using a 3/16 inch plate to grind our meat today. If you're thinking in metric, that's 4.7 millimeters. And after a little fumbling, we get our retaining ring on and we're ready to grind. We'll load some meat in the tray, and it's a good idea to drop a few cubes into the feeder chute before you start the machine. Now we'll power it up and start grinding. Our number 12 grinder works pretty quickly, so it only took about 20 minutes to process this batch of over 15 pounds. It's a good idea to work quickly because the fat and the meat will smear or partially melt from the heat of the grinder and it stays in too long. We're halfway through at this point. This bowl full we'll hold in the refrigerator while we grind the rest of the meat. Once all the cubes have passed through the grinder, we'll put a handful of ground meat in to push them through, and then we'll be done grinding. The next step is to weigh our ground meat so we can accurately measure the salt, spices, and liquids that go into the sausage. The recipe we use is in the video description, so you can make a batch of your own. You'll notice everything is in grams, and while that means you'll do a little math, it's the only way you could be consistent in your sausage making. Now, speaking of salt, spices, and liquids, this is what goes into this batch. Salt, black pepper, basil, oregano, fennel seeds, ground coriander seed, garlic powder, red pepper flakes, and a shot of Korean Gochugaru. Our liquids are red wine and ice water. Oh yeah, you'll want to crack the fennel seeds in a mortar and pestle or give them a little whiz in a spice grinder to break them up a little. Now it's time to mix. I think Santa may have seen this painful 10 minutes of mixing by hand when we made andouille a few months back, because this beautiful meat mixer showed up under the tree on Christmas morning. It's not a whole lot faster than mixing by hand, but at least our hands were warm. Our 16 pounds or so of ground meat goes into the mixer, followed by the salt, pepper, and other spices. After a few minutes of mixing, you'll see the mass is getting sticky and binding together all very nicely. So that means it's time to add our liquids. The red wine first gets mixed in. And once the wine is fully incorporated, we'll mix in the water. We discovered a few backward turns of the crank seem to help in the mixing process. And now that everything is fully mixed, you see how the meat mass will stick to my hand? That means it's ready. It's just what we want. So we'll go ahead and unload the mixer so we can be ready to stuff our sausage into casings. Let's load up our stuffer now. Pack it in nice and tight. Be sure there aren't any air bubbles. And then we're ready to go. We'll stretch a casing onto the stuffer horn. And we'll tie a knot in the end. After that, it's a matter of letting the sausage fill the casing, but keeping just the right amount of tension on the casing as it slips from the horn. Too tight and you risk blowouts. Too loose and your links won't be fully filled out. We filled this casing, so we'll roll it up in a spiral and make it easier to work with. And then we'll take our sausage pricker and poke a few holes in it so our sausages don't have air bubbles causing problems later. Now it's time to make links. We have a sheet pan with marks along one side to help us measure. We'll just lay that sausage up along the side, pinch at the marks, and twist the sausage to make our links. Notice how we roll forward on one link and backward on the next, so that our sausages don't come untwisted as we go. Well, this rope of sausages is done, so we'll transfer the links to another sheet pan, pop a lid on it, and let the sausage rest in the refrigerator overnight. The next day, after the sausages have had time to let their flavors meld and the casings dry a little, we'll cut the individual links apart and we'll get them arranged on trays. From there, they'll go in the freezer, and then we'll package them up to keep for the long term. There you have it, spicy Italian sausage from Father, Son, and Skillet. Be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And again, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Father, Son, and Skillet.